It was a Saturday morning, and my wife, Jessica, rarely came to watch me train with Coach Derek. Yet there she was, standing near the bleachers, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. I wiped the sweat from my face and jogged over, expecting her usual cheerful smile. Instead, her face turned pale, and she quickly stuffed her phone into her bag. "Hey, Jess," I said, confused. "What brings you here?" "Just thought I'd stop by," she replied, her voice too bright, too rehearsed. Coach Derek approached, his grin easy as always. He was tall, athletic, and annoyingly charismatic, the kind of guy who had a story for every occasion. "Great session today, Adam," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Jessica, nice to see you." Her response was tight, almost nervous. Something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica and Derek were hiding something. I wasn't the jealous type, but her behavior had been off for weeks. Late nights at work, unexplained absences, and a sudden obsession with fitness. I decided to check her phone while she showered, my heart racing as I scrolled through her messages. And there it was, a series of texts between her and Derek. Flirty, suggestive, and damning. My hands trembled as I read their exchanges. Phrases like "last night was amazing" and "can't wait to see you again" burned into my brain. My world tilted. This wasn't just a fling. It was a betrayal from two people I had trusted implicitly. I confronted Jessica that night, my anger barely contained. "Care to explain this?" I demanded, holding up her phone. Her face drained of color, and she stammered, "Adam, I can explain." "Don't bother," I snapped, cutting her off. "You've been lying to me." "With him?" "My coach." She burst into tears, but her apologies sounded hollow. "It was a mistake," she sobbed. "It didn't mean anything." Her words only fueled my rage. "Didn't mean anything? Jessica, you destroyed our marriage over nothing." She begged me to forgive her, but my trust was shattered. I needed time to think, to process what had just happened. That night, I slept on the couch, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and revenge. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, a plan began to form in my mind. If Jessica and Derek thought they could humiliate me and get away with it, they were wrong. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity and exposing them for who they truly were. The next morning, Jessica was unusually quiet. She moved around the house like a shadow, avoiding eye contact and offering half-hearted apologies. I said little, my mind preoccupied with the plan taking shape. She thought her tears and apologies would be enough, that we could sweep this under the rug and move on. But I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. I needed more proof. The texts on her phone were damning, but I wanted to catch them in the act. Something undeniable. Derek was arrogant and careless, and Jessica seemed too emotional to think clearly. They would slip up again. I just needed to be ready when they did. That afternoon, I went to practice, acting as if nothing had changed. Derek greeted me with his usual grin, completely oblivious to the fact that I knew about him and Jessica. "Ready to crush it today?" he asked, tossing me a football. I forced a smile, masking the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Always." Practice went as usual, but every interaction with Derek felt like a challenge. Every pat on the back, every joke, it all reeked of betrayal. When it was over, I lingered near the locker room, pretending to check my phone. Sure enough, Derek slipped away early, muttering something about having plans. I followed at a distance, my heart pounding as I watched him leave the facility and head toward his car. I trailed him carefully, my palms slick with sweat. Derek drove to a small cafe on the outskirts of town, parking in a secluded spot near the back. Moments later, Jessica's car pulled up beside his. I stayed hidden, watching as they stepped out and greeted each other. Their smiles were too familiar, their body language too intimate. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was what I needed, confirmation of their affair and a chance to plan my next move. I snapped a few photos from a distance, capturing them hugging and holding hands. It wasn't much, but it was enough to shatter any defense they might try to use. As they disappeared into the cafe, I drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The images I'd captured were burned into my memory, fueling my determination to see this through. Jessica had underestimated me. Derek had underestimated me. And soon, they would realize their mistake. When I got home, Jessica was already there, pretending nothing had happened. She greeted me with a weak smile, but I ignored her, heading straight for the spare room where I kept my laptop. I began piecing together everything I'd found, the texts, the photos, and the lies she'd told me over the past few weeks. By the time I finished, it felt like I was staring at a case file. This wasn't just personal. It was a betrayal that deserved consequences. But revenge wasn't just about hurting them. It was about exposing the truth and reclaiming my sense of control. That night, Jessica tried to talk to me again, but I cut her off. "Save it," I said coldly. "You don't get to cry your way out of this." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. This was the calm before the storm, and I was ready to bring it all crashing down. The morning felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just the weight of everything on my mind. Jessica moved around the house cautiously, her every glance filled with uncertainty. She had no idea I'd followed her or the photos I'd taken. I decided to keep playing the part of the oblivious husband. For now, if this was going to work, I needed to stay one step ahead. Later that day, I texted Derek, acting as if nothing was wrong. "Hey, coach. Need to talk about my training schedule. You free later?" He replied quickly. "Sure, let's catch up after practice." Perfect. At practice, I studied Derek's movements carefully, watching how he interacted with the other players, how easily he masked his lies. He was charming, confident, and completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. I went through the drills like a robot, my mind elsewhere. I wasn't just planning revenge. I was crafting a lesson neither of them would forget. After practice, Derek and I met in his office. He leaned back in his chair, all smiles. "What's up, man?" I forced a grin, pretending to talk about training, but my real goal was to plant a seed. "You know, Jess has been asking about coming to more games," I said casually. He raised an eyebrow, his smile faltering slightly. "Oh, yeah, I said, keeping my tone light. "She's been really into the team lately. Must be all those fitness tips you gave her." Derek laughed nervously, his confidence cracking just a little. "Yeah, well, she's a fast learner." I resisted the urge to call him out right then and there. Instead, I kept the conversation going, subtly letting him know I was paying attention. By the time I left his office, I could see the unease in his eyes. He didn't know what I knew, but he was starting to feel the pressure. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and began laying the groundwork for the next phase of my plan. Jessica's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was public, and I intended to make sure everyone knew the truth. I created a fake social media account, carefully crafting it to look legitimate. The username was innocuous, the profile picture generic, but the purpose was anything but. Using the account, I uploaded the photos of Jessica and Derek at the cafe, pairing them with screenshots of their incriminating texts. The caption was simple: "Betrayal in plain sight." Some coaches don't just train athletes, they train marriages to fail. I scheduled the post to go live the following morning, ensuring that it would catch the most attention. When I returned to the living room, Jessica was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I entered, her expression uncertain. "Adam," she began hesitantly, "we need to talk." "We've talked enough," I said coldly. "You said it didn't mean anything, but I know that's a lie." Her face crumpled, but I didn't let her tears affect me. "Tomorrow, everyone else will know the truth too." She stared at me, confusion and fear flickering in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "You'll see," I said, walking away. "Maybe then you'll understand what betrayal really feels like." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Part of me wondered if I was going too far, but the pain of her betrayal burned too brightly to ignore. Derek had crossed a line, and Jessica had followed him willingly. They deserved to face the consequences together. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a strange sense of calm. The pieces were falling into place, and by tomorrow, the world would see them for who they truly were. The next morning, I woke early, my heart racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. The post was scheduled to go live at 8 a.m., and by now, it was already out in the world. Jessica was still asleep, her phone resting on the nightstand. I glanced at it briefly, knowing the storm brewing on the other side of that screen. I grabbed my laptop and checked the fake account. The post was already gaining traction, with dozens of comments and shares flooding in. By the time Jessica woke up, the post had gone viral in our small town. The incriminating photos and texts were being shared widely, and the comments ranged from outrage to disbelief. "Have you seen this?" a friend texted me, attaching a screenshot of the post. Crazy stuff, man. Who would have thought? I smiled grimly, replying with a simple, yeah, wild. Jessica stumbled into the kitchen, looking groggy. Morning, she said hesitantly, as if testing my mood. I sipped my coffee, saying nothing. Moments later, her phone buzzed loudly on the counter. Then again, and again. She frowned, picking it up. Her face paled as she read the messages flooding her screen. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice trembling. Adam, what is this? I set my mug down, meeting her panicked gaze. Looks like someone decided to share the truth, I said calmly. Her hands shook as she clutched the phone. You did this? What did you expect, Jessica? I said, my voice cold. That I'd just roll over and let you and Derek make a fool of me? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. You had this coming, I added. Both of you. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. She hesitated, then answered, her voice shaky. Hello, she said, her expression quickly shifting from panic to horror. No, I don't know how it got out. I am sorry. I'll fix this. It didn't take a genius to guess who was on the other end, Derek. As she ended the call, her tears turned to anger. Do you have any idea what you've done? She demanded. I exposed the truth, I said simply. And now everyone knows what kind of people you and Derek really are. Jessica stormed out of the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I didn't feel guilt, only a grim satisfaction. At practice that afternoon, the tension was palpable. Whispers and stares followed Derek as he walked onto the field, his usual cocky grin replaced by a tight, forced smile. He tried to act like nothing was wrong, barking orders at the players, but his composure cracked every time his phone buzzed. I stayed silent, observing from the sidelines as the whispers grew louder. Finally, one of the players asked the question everyone was thinking. Coach, is it true? You and Adam's wife. The words hung in the air like a bomb, and Derek froze. His eyes darted toward me, filled with panic and fury. Everyone back to practice, he snapped, his voice strained. But it was too late. The damage was done. By the end of practice, Derek pulled me aside, his face red with anger. You did this, he hissed, keeping his voice low. You think you can humiliate me like this and get away with it? You humiliated yourself. I shot back, my voice steady. I just made sure everyone saw the truth. Derek's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. You'll regret this, Adam. I promise you that. Maybe, I said, shrugging. But not as much as you'll regret crossing me. I walked away, leaving him fuming on the field. His threats didn't scare me. If anything, they fueled my determination. That evening, Jessica returned home, her face streaked with tears. Adam, she said, her voice breaking. We need to talk. I crossed my arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. I am listening. She hesitated, then said, I made a mistake. I know I hurt you, but this is too much. You're ruining my life. I stared at her, my expression cold. You ruined your own life, Jessica. I'm just making sure you face the consequences. Her tears didn't move me. This wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about justice. Jessica sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. Her phone continued to buzz relentlessly, each new notification a reminder of the chaos that had erupted around her. Adam, you've made your point, she said, her voice trembling. But this is cruel. Cruel, I replied, leaning against the counter. You think this is cruel? Try being betrayed by your wife and your coach. Two people I trusted. Her tears came quickly, but I didn't flinch. For once, I felt like I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let her guilt trip me. You should have thought about the consequences before you decided to sneak around, I added, my voice cold. Jessica looked up, her eyes red and swollen. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. I don't even know how it got this far. Spare me the excuses, I snapped. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. She didn't respond, her silence speaking volumes. For the first time, I saw her as someone who wasn't in control, someone who was crumbling under the weight of her own mistakes. The next morning, the fallout continued. Derek's reputation was in freefall, with parents and players questioning his integrity. The whispers had turned into outright accusations, and it was clear he was struggling to maintain control. At practice, he avoided me, barking orders at the team with a nervous edge in his voice. But his authority had been undermined, and everyone could see it. As I left the field, one of the players approached me. "Hey, Adam," he said, glancing around nervously. "Is it true? About Coach and your wife?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, it's true." The player shook his head, his expression a mix of disbelief and disgust. "Man, that's messed up." The confrontation I knew was coming finally happened that evening. Derek showed up at my house, pounding on the door like a man possessed. I opened it, finding him red-faced and furious. "We need to talk," he growled. "Talk about what?" I replied, crossing my arms. "How you slept with my wife. Or how everyone knows now." Derek stepped inside, slamming the door behind him. "You're ruining my career, Adam," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you even understand what you've done?" "I'm not the one who destroyed your career," I shot back. "You did that when you decided to betray me." His fist clenched, and for a moment I thought he might actually hit me. But he held back, his anger simmering just below the surface. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice dripping with venom. "It's not. You want a war, Adam? You've got one." I didn't flinch. "Bring it on, Derek. I've got nothing to lose." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Jessica emerged from the hallway, her face pale. "What was that about?" she asked hesitantly. "Derek doesn't like facing the consequences of his actions," I said flatly. She bit her lip, her guilt written all over her face. "Adam, I never wanted this to happen." "Save it," I replied, my tone sharp. "You wanted him, and now you've got him. Enjoy the fallout." Her tears welled up again, but I didn't stay to watch. I grabbed my keys and left the house, needing space to think. As I drove aimlessly through the city, a strange sense of clarity began to settle over me. The lines had been drawn, and there was no turning back. Derek had declared war, and Jessica was caught in the crossfire. But this wasn't just about them anymore. This was about me reclaiming control of my life on my terms. That night, I returned home and sat in the darkened living room, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The anger, the betrayal, the chaos, it all felt overwhelming. But beneath it all was a flicker of determination. I wasn't done yet. The next day felt different, heavier. Jessica barely left the bedroom. Her door closed tightly, as if shutting out the chaos could make it disappear. I didn't bother trying to talk to her. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I focused on preparing for the inevitable escalation. Derek's threats weren't empty, and I knew he wouldn't back down quietly. The question wasn't if he'd retaliate. It was how. By mid-morning, the answer came in the form of a notification on my phone. A new post on social media, shared by Derek's account, had begun making waves. The caption read, "Sometimes people fabricate lies to cover their own failures. Don't believe everything you see." Attached were photos of Derek shaking hands with players and a video of him addressing the team, emphasizing unity and trust. It was a transparent attempt to shift the narrative, to paint himself as the victim of baseless accusations. My jaw tightened as I read through the comments. His supporters were rallying behind him, accusing me of orchestrating a smear campaign out of jealousy. One comment in particular stood out. "Funny how the guy making all the noise doesn't have his own life together. Maybe he should focus on fixing himself." The words stung, but I refused to let them derail me. This wasn't just about public opinion. It was about exposing the truth. That evening, Erica called, an old friend I hadn't heard from in months. "Adam, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I saw everything online." I hesitated, unsure how much to share. "It's a long story," I said finally. "Well, if you need backup, you know where to find me," she replied. Her words brought a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone in this as I thought. The next day, I arrived at practice, bracing myself for the tension that had been building all week. Derek was already there, his usual confidence replaced by a sharp edge. The players were quieter than usual, their glances darting between me and Derek like they were waiting for a confrontation. And then it happened. One of the younger players, Tyler, stepped forward, his voice hesitant but firm. "Coach, is it true? What they're saying about you and Adam's wife?" The question hung in the air like a bomb. Derek froze, his jaw tightening. "Focus on practice," he barked, avoiding the question. But Tyler didn't back down. "We deserve to know the truth," he said. Derek's composure cracked. Enough, he shouted, his voice echoing across the field. This is all nonsense. Lies spread by someone who can't handle their own failures. His eyes locked on me, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Why don't you tell them, Adam? He sneered. Tell them why you're really doing this. The players turned to me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the tension. Because the truth matters, I said simply. And you deserve to know what kind of man you're dealing with. Derek laughed bitterly, but it was hollow, forced. You're pathetic, he said, dragging everyone into your personal vendetta. Pathetic. I shot back, my anger flaring. Coming from the guy who couldn't keep his hands off another man's wife? The field fell silent, the weight of my words hitting like a tidal wave. Derek's face turned red, his mask of control slipping. You've got no proof, he said through gritted teeth. Oh, I've got plenty, I replied, my voice cold. And so does everyone else now. He lunged at me, his rage finally boiling over. Players stepped in, pulling us apart before things could escalate further, but the damage was done. The team looked at Derek differently now, not with respect, but with doubt. The seeds of his downfall had been planted, and they were starting to take root. As I left the field, my phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. We need to talk. Please. I ignored it, my focus elsewhere. Jessica's apologies meant nothing to me anymore. She'd made her choice, and now I was making mine. That night, I met with Erica, who had heard about the confrontation. You're playing with fire, she said, her tone cautious. I know, I replied, but I'm not stopping until Derek pays for what he's done. Erica sighed, shaking her head. Just don't lose yourself in the process, Adam. Her words stayed with me as I drove home. The line between justice and revenge was becoming blurrier by the day, and I wasn't sure which side I was on anymore. But one thing was certain, the fight wasn't over yet. The following morning, the fallout from the practice confrontation was already rippling through the team. I received several texts from players, some asking questions, others expressing their disillusionment with Derek. Is it true? One text read, Coach has been acting weird all week. Another player wrote, You did the right thing. Someone had to call him out. It wasn't just the team that was shifting. Word had spread beyond the field. Parents of players were voicing their concerns to the administration, questioning whether Derek was fit to lead the team. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. Derek's carefully crafted facade was beginning to crumble. At home, Jessica's texts were relentless. Each one was a plea for forgiveness, a desperate attempt to salvage what little remained of our marriage. Adam, I know I hurt you, but please, we can work through this. I made a mistake. Don't let this destroy everything we've built. I didn't respond. Her words felt empty, and my trust in her was gone. That afternoon, Erica called again, her voice tinged with urgency. Adam, have you seen the latest? What are you talking about? I asked, pulling up social media. A new post from Derek had surfaced, but this time it wasn't defensive. It was an outright attack. The post read, When lies aren't enough, some people resort to manipulation. I've got nothing to hide. Can Adam say the same? Attached was a photo of me and Jessica from happier times, accompanied by a caption implying that I had been controlling and emotionally abusive during our marriage. My blood boiled as I read the comments, many of them siding with Derek and painting me as the villain. That son of a, I muttered, gripping the phone tightly. Don't let him get to you, Erica said. This is his way of deflecting. He's losing, and he knows it. But people are believing him, I said, frustration seeping into my voice. Not everyone, Erica replied. You've got support. Focus on that. Despite her reassurance, the post gnawed at me. Derek's ability to twist the narrative was infuriating, and I knew I needed to counter it. I spent the evening gathering more evidence, texts, photos, anything that could dismantle his claims. If Derek wanted a public battle, I was ready to fight. Meanwhile, Jessica finally confronted me in person. She stood in the doorway of the living room, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. Why are you ignoring me? She demanded. We need to talk, Adam. This is getting out of hand. I stared at her, my voice cold. You mean it's getting out of your control? She flinched but pressed on. This isn't just about us anymore. You're dragging everyone into this. Our friends, our families, the team. You think I wanted this? I shot back. You and Derek made this mess. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. She wasn't the victim here. As the tension between us simmered, my phone buzzed with another text, this time from one of the parents on the team. Adam, we're having a meeting tonight about Derek. You should come. It was the opening I needed. If the parents were questioning his leadership, it could be the final nail in his coffin. That evening, I arrived at the meeting held in the community center. The room was filled with concerned parents, their voices low and anxious as they discussed Derek's behavior. When I walked in, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to me, and I felt the weight of their expectations. Adam, one parent said, stepping forward, we've heard a lot of rumors. We need to know the truth. I took a deep breath, then spoke. Everything you've heard is true, I said. Derek betrayed not just me, but this entire team. He's been lying to all of us, and he doesn't deserve to lead. The room erupted into murmurs, some supportive, others skeptical. But as I shared the evidence I'd gathered, the tide began to turn. By the end of the meeting, the parents had made their decision. They would demand Derek's resignation. As I left the community center, a sense of vindication washed over me. Derek's power was slipping through his fingers, and for the first time, I felt like I was gaining the upper hand. The morning after the parents' meeting, whispers of their decision had already spread. By the time I arrived at practice, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Derek stood at the center of the field, his usual confidence replaced by a visible strain. He barked orders, but his voice lacked its usual authority. The players responded sluggishly, their respect for him clearly eroded. One of the parents, Mr. Reynolds, approached during the warm-up. His presence on the sidelines was unusual, and Derek noticed immediately. Can I help you? Derek asked, his tone clipped. We need to talk, Mr. Reynolds replied, his expression firm. Now! Derek hesitated, then motioned for the assistant coach to take over. I watched from a distance as Mr. Reynolds led him toward the bleachers, the weight of the conversation evident in their body language. When Derek returned, his face was pale, his jaw clenched tightly. He finished practice in silence, avoiding eye contact with anyone. That evening, the team group chat exploded with messages. Tyler, coach is done. Heard the parents are pushing for him to step down. Jake, about time. Dude's been acting sketchy for weeks. Me, it's happening. Be ready. I couldn't deny the satisfaction bubbling inside me. Derek's empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Later that night, Jessica confronted me again, her face a mixture of desperation and anger. Adam, this has to stop, she said. You've made your point. What more do you want? I want accountability, I replied. For both of you. She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. You're destroying everything. For what? Revenge? It's not just revenge, I said, my voice steady. It's about exposing the truth. You and Derek thought you could get away with this. You were wrong. Jessica's composure cracked, and she let out a frustrated sob. I didn't mean for this to happen, Adam. I made a mistake. Can't we just move on? You made your choice, Jessica, I said coldly. Now you have to live with it. The next day, I received a text from Erica. Derek's resignation is official. The school board's making the announcement tomorrow. I stared at the message, a sense of triumph washing over me. Derek's reign was finally coming to an end. At practice, the mood was tense. Derek's presence felt like a shadow looming over the field, but it was clear he knew his time was up. He avoided the players, barking half-hearted orders before retreating to his office. As practice ended, Tyler approached me, his expression serious. Thanks for standing up to him, he said. We all saw through his act, but no one knew how to call him out. You guys deserve better, I replied. And now you'll get it. The following morning, the school board's announcement made headlines. Coach Derek Spencer resigns amid controversy. The statement was carefully worded, emphasizing Derek's personal reasons for stepping down, but everyone knew the truth. The comments online were a mix of relief and schadenfreude, with some defending him and others celebrating his departure. Jessica's silence was deafening. She avoided me for most of the day, retreating into her own guilt and shame. I didn't press her. My focus was on the victory I'd fought so hard to achieve. But as the dust settled, a strange feeling began to creep in, emptiness. Derek was gone, Jessica was broken, and I was left wondering what came next. That night, Erica called again. It's over, she said simply. Yeah, I replied, my voice flat. You don't sound happy, she noted. I guess I thought it would feel different, I admitted. Erica sighed. That's the thing about revenge, Adam. It doesn't fill the hole they left. It just gives you something to do while you're hurting. Her words hit harder than I expected, leaving me staring at the dark ceiling long after we ended the call. The day after Derek's resignation, I woke up feeling nothing. For weeks, I'd been consumed by anger and a need for revenge. And now that it was over, the emptiness was almost worse. Jessica was already up, sitting silently at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. Her phone buzzed every few minutes, but she ignored it, staring blankly into the distance. Any new messages from Derek? I asked coldly, breaking the silence. She flinched but didn't look up. I haven't heard from him since yesterday. The bitterness in her voice was hard to miss, but I didn't press further. Whatever regret she was feeling, it was hers to bear. Later that morning, Erica texted me again. How are you holding up? Victory lap or post-battle blues? I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Finally, I typed back, a little of both. Mostly just lost. Her reply came quickly. It's normal. You've been running on adrenaline for so long, and now it's gone. Give yourself time to figure out what's next. What was next? The question lingered in my mind as I went through the motions of the day. My marriage was in ruins, my trust shattered, and my future felt like a blank slate. By afternoon, Jessica finally broke her silence. Adam, she said hesitantly, standing in the doorway of the living room. We need to talk. I sighed, setting my phone down. What now, Jessica? I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she began, her voice shaking. But I need to know if there's any chance we can fix this. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For weeks, I'd been so focused on exposing her betrayal that I hadn't considered what would happen afterward. Fix this, I repeated, my tone sharp. Jessica, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice, repeatedly. How do I come back from that? Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. I don't know, she admitted. But I want to try. I stood, pacing the room as my thoughts swirled. Part of me wanted to tell her it was too late, that her actions had burned every bridge between us. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, remembered the years we'd spent building a life together. Why now? I asked finally. Why do you care all of a sudden? Because I see what I've done, she said, her voice breaking. And I hate myself for it. Her vulnerability was unsettling. For weeks, I'd only seen her as the villain in my story, but now, she seemed just as lost as I was. I can't give you an answer right now, I said, my voice softer than before. I need time. Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. That evening, I called Erica needing someone to talk to. Jessica wants to try again, I said bluntly. And how do you feel about that? Erica asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to slam the door in her face, but another part of me misses what we had. Erica was quiet for a moment before replying. Rebuilding trust is possible, but it's not easy. And it's not something you owe her. You need to decide what's best for you. Her words stayed with me as I hung up, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. As I sat alone in the darkened living room, my mind drifted back to the beginning, before the betrayal, before the chaos. Jessica and I had been happy once, hadn't we? Or had I been blind to the cracks all along? The questions were endless, and the answers felt just out of reach. For the first time in weeks, I felt the anger inside me begin to fade, replaced by something else, exhaustion. I was tired of fighting, tired of hurting, tired of being consumed by the past. But moving forward meant making a choice, and I wasn't sure I was ready to make it. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. Jessica was in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. The sight of her vulnerability stirred something unexpected in me, a small flicker of compassion. I poured a cup of coffee and sat across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, I broke the silence. I don't know if we can fix this, I said honestly. But I also don't know if I'm ready to give up entirely. Her eyes widened, hope flickering on her face. I'll do whatever it takes, Adam. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what to do. Her desperation was genuine, but I wasn't ready to make promises. This isn't something we can just fix overnight, I said. It's going to take time. And honestly, I don't even know if it's possible. Jessica nodded, tears brimming again. I understand. I just want a chance. Later that day, I called Erica to share my decision. I'm not saying we're getting back together, I told her, but I'm willing to see if there's anything left worth saving. Erica was quiet for a moment before replying. That's brave, Adam. But make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, not just because it's easier than starting over. Her words stayed with me as I hung up. Was I doing this because I still cared for Jessica? Or was I simply afraid of what life would look like without her? That evening, Jessica suggested we start with an open conversation. No defensiveness, no interruptions, she said. Just honesty. I agreed, though the idea of laying everything bare made me uneasy. We sat in the living room, facing each other like strangers. Jessica began, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I need you to know that it wasn't about you, Adam. It was about me. Her words stung, but I let her continue. I was insecure, unhappy with myself, and I thought Derek made me feel alive again. But it was all an illusion. He didn't care about me, and I was too blind to see it. I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. You had a choice, Jessica, and you chose to betray me. I know, she said, her voice breaking, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But I'm asking you to try. Her vulnerability disarmed me, but the pain of her betrayal still lingered. I don't know if I can, I admitted. You broke my trust, Jess. And without trust, what do we have? We have a history, she said softly. We have a family, and we have the chance to rebuild, if you're willing. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of possibility. The next day, I scheduled an appointment with a therapist, hoping to find clarity in the chaos. Jessica agreed to join me, though the tension between us was palpable. The therapist, a calm and composed woman named Dr. Hayes, began by asking us to share what we wanted out of the process. I want to understand why this happened, I said bluntly, and whether we can move past it. I want to rebuild what we've lost, Jessica said, her voice trembling. But I know it won't be easy. Dr. Hayes nodded, her expression neutral. Honesty is a good starting point, but rebuilding trust takes time and consistent effort. Are you both willing to commit to that? I hesitated, then nodded. I'm willing to try. Jessica echoed my response, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. The first session was draining but productive. We talked about communication, accountability, and the importance of setting boundaries. It was clear that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. That night, as Jessica and I sat in silence on opposite ends of the couch, I realized that the anger inside me was beginning to fade. It wasn't gone, not by a long shot, but it no longer consumed me. Thank you, Jessica said quietly, breaking the silence. For what? I asked. For giving us a chance, she replied. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful. Her sincerity caught me off guard, and for a moment, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, redemption was possible. Therapy became a strange new routine for us. Twice a week, Jessica and I would sit across from Dr. Hayes, peeling back the layers of our relationship and exposing the wounds we'd both tried to ignore for years. Jessica was surprisingly open, admitting to feelings of inadequacy and a long-standing sense of unhappiness she'd hidden from me. It wasn't an excuse, she said during one session, her voice trembling. But I felt invisible, Adam. And Derek, he noticed me. Her words stung, but they also forced me to confront my own role in our breakdown. Maybe I wasn't as present as I should have been, I admitted reluctantly. I thought providing for us was enough. I didn't realize you needed more. Dr. Hayes interjected gently. Acknowledging your own blind spots is important, Adam, but Jessica's actions were her choice. Accountability needs to go both ways. Outside of therapy, things remain tense. Jessica tried to make amends in small ways, cooking dinner, leaving me notes of encouragement, even suggesting we revisit old hobbies we'd enjoyed together. But trust isn't rebuilt overnight, and every gesture felt like a bandage on a wound that hadn't healed. One evening, she brought up an idea that caught me off guard. What if we took a trip? She suggested hesitantly. Just the two of us. A fresh start, away from all this. Ich stelle her, skeptical. You think a vacation will fix this? No, she admitted. But maybe it'll give us a chance to remember why we were good together in the first place. Her proposal lingered in my mind over the next few days. I wasn't sure if I was ready to spend that much time alone with her, but part of me was curious if there was still something worth salvaging. Eventually, I agreed on the condition that it'd be a short trip. One weekend, I said firmly. No grand gestures, no forced optimism, just realness. Jessica nodded, her relief evident. Thank you, Adam. That's all I'm asking for. The weekend came quickly, and we drove to a quiet lakeside cabin a few hours from town. The air was crisp, the scenery serene, but the silence between us was heavy. Jessica tried to fill it with small talk, but I wasn't ready to pretend things were normal. Instead, I focused on the simplicity of the setting. Chopping wood, fishing by the lake, and watching the sun set behind the trees. It was peaceful, but the unspoken tension lingered. On the second evening, we finally addressed the elephant in the room. Sitting by the fire, Jessica turned to me, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. Do you think we'll ever get past this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, I replied honestly. Some days it feels possible. Other days it doesn't. Her shoulders slumped, but she nodded. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you, if you'll let me. Her vulnerability was disarming, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman who had been buried beneath layers of guilt and regret. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said finally, but I'm willing to keep trying. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of hope. Thank you, Adam, she said softly. That's all I need to hear. As the weekend ended, I found myself feeling lighter. The anger that had consumed me for weeks was beginning to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like we were taking steps in the right direction. Back in town, the reality of our situation hit me once again. The whispers, the stares, the lingering fallout from Derek's downfall. They were all reminders of how far we still had to go. But as I glanced at Jessica, who seemed more determined than ever to rebuild what we'd lost, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was hope after all. Life had settled into a fragile routine. Therapy continued. Jessica worked tirelessly to prove her sincerity, and I kept myself busy with work and old hobbies I'd neglected. But just as things began to feel stable, an unexpected text threw everything into disarray. We need to talk. It's important. It was from Derek. I stared at the message, anger bubbling to the surface. After everything he'd done, he had the audacity to reach out? My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity and lingering resentment got the better of me. What do you want? I replied. His response came quickly. Meet me at the diner tonight. There are things you need to know. I debated whether to go. Jessica noticed my tension and asked, Everything okay? It's nothing, I said curtly, not ready to involve her. That evening, I drove to the diner, my mind racing with possibilities. Was Derek trying to apologize? Or was this another ploy to twist the narrative in his favor? He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth at the back. He looked different, disheveled, defeated, and far from the smug, confident man I'd once known. You've got 5 minutes, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. Fair enough, he replied, his voice hoarse. Look, I'm not here to fight. I need to clear the air. I crossed my arms, skeptical. Why now? Because I've lost everything, he admitted, his gaze fixed on the table. My job, my reputation, everything's gone. And I've had a lot of time to think about what I did. I didn't respond, letting the silence force him to continue. I screwed up, Derek said finally. I let my ego and my impulses ruin lives, and I'm paying the price for it. But there's more to this than you realize. His words sent a chill down my spine. What are you talking about? Jessica didn't come to me, he said, his voice trembling. I pursued her. I manipulated her, played on her insecurities. I wanted to hurt you, Adam. You were everything I wanted to be, and I couldn't stand it. This confession hit me like a gut punch. Derek's actions weren't just a betrayal. They were calculated, a deliberate attempt to tear me down. You're telling me this now? After everything you've done? I said, my voice rising. I know it doesn't fix anything, he said quickly. But you deserve the truth. And I wanted to warn you. Warn me about what? I demanded. Derek hesitated, glancing around the diner before leaning in. There are people out there who don't want this story to die, he said quietly. People who see you as a threat because you exposed me. I frowned, my skepticism returning. Why should I believe you? Because I've got nothing left to lose, he said bitterly. His warning unsettled me, but I wasn't ready to trust him. If you think this erases what you did, you're wrong, I said coldly. I know, Derek replied, standing to leave. But I wanted you to hear from me. Good luck, Adam. As he walked out, I sat in the booth, my mind racing. Derek's confession and warning left me with more questions than answers. When I got home, Jessica was waiting in the living room, her expression anxious. Where were you? She asked. I hesitated, then decided to tell her. I met with Derek. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. Why would you do that? He reached out, I said simply, and he told me some things I needed to hear. Jessica sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. What did he say? I hesitated, debating whether to reveal Derek's manipulation. Finally, I said, he admitted to pursuing you, to manipulating you. He wanted to hurt me. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Adam, I didn't know. I'm not telling you this to absolve you, I said firmly. You still made choices, but now I understand the full picture. Jessica nodded, her tears falling silently. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. The weight of her apology felt different this time, heavier, more genuine. But forgiveness still felt like a distant possibility. As I went to bed that night, Derek's warning echoed in my mind. If what he said was true, the fallout from his downfall wasn't over yet, and I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The morning after Derek's confession, I woke with a sense of unease. His words played on a loop in my mind. There are people out there who don't want this story to die. Who are these people? And why would they see me as a threat? Jessica was unusually quiet, tiptoeing around me like she was afraid to disturb whatever storm was brewing inside. She hadn't slept much either. Her swollen eyes gave her away. I decided to revisit the messages and posts that had circulated during the height of Derek's downfall. Scrolling through old screenshots, I noticed a few recurring usernames that had been unusually aggressive in defending Derek. Their comments weren't just supportive. They were targeted, accusing me of lying and painting Jessica as a victim manipulated by me. One username stood out at TruthWatcher88. The account had been relentless, posting dozens of comments and messages during the fallout, then going silent once Derek resigned. Curiosity got the better of me, and I searched for the account. It was still active, but the recent posts were cryptic. You think it's over, but the truth always finds a way out. Another read. Justice will come for the real liars. A chill ran down my spine. Was this connected to Derek's warning? Or was it just an internet troll looking for attention? I showed Erica the messages later that day, seeking her opinion. It's probably nothing, she said, though her brow furrowed. But you should keep an eye on it. Some people don't know how to let things go. Her reassurance was helpful, but it didn't erase the gnawing feeling that something was brewing just beneath the surface. That evening, Jessica approached me cautiously. Adam, I need to ask you something, she said. What is it? I replied, wary of her tone. Do you think Derek was telling the truth about everything? She asked, her voice trembling. About the manipulation, about people targeting you? I hesitated. I think Derek's capable of a lot of things, but I also think he's desperate. Desperate people say whatever they think will save them. Jessica nodded, though her unease was evident. I don't want this to come back and hurt you, Adam. You've already been through enough. Her concern felt genuine, but I wasn't sure if it was enough to bridge the gulf between us. That night, I received an email from an anonymous address. You don't know the whole story. Meet me at the park tomorrow, 9 p.m. Come alone. My heart raced as I reread the message. Was this another of Derek's mind games? Or was someone else trying to involve me in their mess? Against my better judgment, I decided to go. The park was quiet and dimly lit when I arrived, the cool night air prickling my skin. I scanned the area, looking for anyone who might be waiting. A figure stepped out from the shadows, their face obscured by the hood of a sweatshirt. Adam, they asked, their voice low and cautious. Who's asking? I replied, my guard up. The figure lowered their hood, revealing a young woman I didn't recognize. "My name's Melissa," she said. "I used to work with Derek." Her name didn't ring a bell, but her expression was serious. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "To warn you," she said, glancing around nervously. "Derek's not the only one who's been pulling strings. There are people tied to him, people who don't want the truth getting out." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. "What kind of people?" I asked. "Investors, sponsors, people who stood to gain from his success," Melissa explained. "They see you as a threat because you exposed him. They think you'll keep digging." I frowned, trying to process what she was saying. "Why tell me this now?" "Because they're watching you," Melissa said, her voice trembling. "And they don't play fair. Be careful, Adam. You don't know how deep this goes." Before I could ask more questions, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone with 1,000 unanswered questions. When I got home, Jessica was waiting, her worry evident. "Where were you?" she asked. "I needed some air," I said vaguely. "Adam, please don't shut me out," she pleaded. "Whatever's going on, we can face it together." Her words hung in the air, but I couldn't bring myself to share what I'd just learned. Not yet. That night, sleep eluded me. Melissa's warning, Derek's confession, the cryptic messages. It all swirled in my mind, forming a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The following day, I couldn't shake the sense that eyes were on me everywhere I went. Melissa's warning played over and over in my head, her trembling voice and darting eyes haunting me. Jessica noticed my unease at breakfast. "Adam, you're distracted," she said softly. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, the words hovering on the tip of my tongue. But how could I explain something so vague, so surreal? "Just work stuff," I lied. The truth was I didn't know who I could trust. Melissa's claim about Derek's network of backers sounded far-fetched, but the pieces were starting to align. Derek's quick rise, his ability to dodge accountability for years. It made sense if there were powerful people protecting him. I spent the morning going through emails, looking for any connections between Derek and local sponsors, donors, or investors. Sure enough, a name popped up repeatedly: Thornwell Ventures. A quick search revealed Thornwell as a major player in funding regional sports programs. They had provided grants for Derek's initiatives, appeared in photos with him at events, and had glowing testimonials about their commitment to fostering leadership. But there was one troubling discovery. Thornwell had a history of silencing critics, using lawsuits and NDAs to sweep scandals under the rug. The pit in my stomach deepened. Melissa might have been right. Later that afternoon, Erica called. "You've been quiet," she said. "What's going on?" I debated whether to tell her about Melissa's warning, but decided to keep it vague. "I've been looking into some of Derek's connections," I said. "Be careful," Erica warned. "These kinds of people don't like being exposed. If you stir the pot, they'll come after you." Her words mirrored Melissa's, and the weight of it all pressed down on me. That evening, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked down the street. It was sleek and dark, its windows tinted. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but when it was still there hours later, my unease grew. Jessica found me pacing by the window. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Probably nothing," I muttered. "Just a strange car outside." She peered out the window, her brow furrowing. "Do you think someone's watching us?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm not taking any chances." Jessica's hand tightened around her phone. "Adam, if you're in trouble, you need to tell me. I can't help you if I don't know what's going on." Her concern seemed genuine, but I wasn't ready to share everything. Not yet. The next day, I reached out to Melissa again, hoping she could provide more clarity. She agreed to meet me at a local coffee shop, her tone tense over the phone. When I arrived, she was already seated in a corner booth, her hands wrapped tightly around a coffee cup. "Thanks for coming," she said, glancing around nervously. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting across from her. Melissa leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thornwell isn't just funding sports programs," she said. "They're involved in all kinds of shady deals, money laundering, kickbacks, you name it. Derek was just a piece of their puzzle." My pulse quickened. "Why would they care about me?" "Because you exposed Derek," she explained. "If people start digging deeper, it could unravel everything they've built. They see you as a threat." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What am I supposed to do?" "Stay low," Melissa said firmly. "Don't poke the bear. And if they approach you, Don't agree to anything without a lawyer. The thought of Thornwell targeting me made my skin crawl, but I couldn't ignore the evidence piling up. When I returned home, Jessica was waiting anxiously. Adam, I've been thinking, she began, wringing her hands. If you're in danger because of all this, maybe we should leave town for a while. I frowned. Run away? That's not the answer. I'm not saying forever, she insisted. Just until things settle down. Please, Adam. I am scared. Her fear was palpable, and for a moment I considered it. But running felt like giving up, like letting Derek and Thornwell win. No, I said finally. I'm not going anywhere. If they want to fight, they'll get one. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. Just promise me you'll be careful. That night, I sat in the darkened living room, staring at the documents I'd collected on Thornwell. Their reach was wide, their power undeniable. But the truth was on my side, and I wasn't going to back down. The fight wasn't just about Derek anymore. It was about exposing the entire web of lies and corruption that had enabled him. And I wasn't afraid to burn it all down. The weight of everything I'd learned sat heavily on my chest. Thornwell's connections, Derek's manipulation, and Melissa's warning. It all painted a picture of a powerful entity that didn't tolerate threats to their carefully constructed facade. But I wasn't backing down. The first step was contacting Kara, a local investigative journalist I'd worked with before. If anyone could help me shine a light on Thornwell's dealings, it was her. When I explained the situation over the phone, she was immediately intrigued. This is big, Adam, she said. But it's dangerous. Are you sure you want to go through with this? I don't have a choice, I replied. People need to know the truth. Kara agreed to meet with me the next morning. In the meantime, I combed through every piece of evidence I had, organizing it into a timeline that connected Thornwell's funding to Derek's activities. Jessica watched silently from the doorway, her concern etched deeply into her face. Adam, she said softly, you're risking everything. What if they come after you? Then they'll prove I'm right, I said firmly. The meeting with Kara was tense, but productive. She pored over the documents I'd collected, her sharp eyes catching details I'd missed. This isn't just corruption, she said finally. It's systemic. Thornwell's been using their funding as a cover for years. What's our next move? I asked. We go public, Kara replied. But we need more. Something irrefutable. That night, I received another email from the anonymous address. You're playing a dangerous game. Stop now, or you'll regret it. The threat sent a chill down my spine, but it only strengthened my resolve. Whoever was behind Thornwell's operations wanted to silence me, and I wasn't about to let them win. Kara and I worked tirelessly over the next few days, piecing together a comprehensive exposé. The story outlined Thornwell's financial misconduct, Derek's role in their schemes, and the lengths they'd gone to in order to protect their interests. Jessica, despite her fear, offered her support. I don't know if I deserve to be part of this, she admitted one evening. But if there's anything I can do to help, I will. Her sincerity surprised me, but I accepted her offer. Rebuilding trust wasn't easy, but this was a step in the right direction. The night before the article was set to go live, Kara called with a warning. I've heard from some sources that Thornwell is aware of our investigation, she said. They're preparing to fight back. Let them, I replied. The truth is on our side. But as I hung up the phone, a knot of anxiety formed in my stomach. I wasn't naive. I knew Thornwell wouldn't go down without a fight. The next morning, Kara's article hit the front page of the local paper and spread like wildfire online. The headline was bold and damning. The hidden corruption of Thornwell Ventures, a web of lies, power, and betrayal. The reaction was immediate. Social media exploded with outrage. Local officials called for investigations, and Thornwell's name was dragged through the mud. But as the story gained traction, the threats escalated. I received more emails, each one more aggressive than the last. One even included a photo of Jessica and me at the park, taken from a distance. I showed the photo to Jessica, and her face went pale. They're watching us, she whispered. Let them, I said, though my heart raced with fear. They can't intimidate me anymore. The following days were a whirlwind. Thornwell's lawyers issued public statements denying the allegations, while whistleblowers came forward to corroborate Kara's story. The momentum was unstoppable, and for the first time, It felt like justice was within reach. Derek, meanwhile, disappeared from the public eye. Rumors swirled that he'd fled the state, unable to handle the fallout. Jessica and I watched the news together, the weight of everything we'd been through finally beginning to lift. "Thank you," she said quietly, her hand resting on mine. "For what?" I asked. "For not giving up," she replied. "On the truth. On us." Her words stayed with me as the weeks passed, and the dust began to settle. The fight had taken its toll, but it had also brought clarity. Thornwell's empire was crumbling, and while the battle wasn't over, the tide had turned. The scars of betrayal would never fully fade, but they no longer defined me. I'd faced the darkness and come out stronger.